Greetings from the Holy Apple Super Wednesdays here. We're on the third day of Tevet, 5780. Hope everybody had a meaningful Hanukkah holiday. Okay, today's subject, of course, we're 7 days away from the 10th of Tevet fast. I'm sure all of you are looking forward to that one. Title of this class today is 10th of Tevet fast. Let's get real. Let's get real. Okay, put on a few seatbelts. Going for a ride here. Timeline. We're talking about the First Temple period. For approximately 30 months, the evil king of Babylonia, Nebuchadnezzar, some say he was Nebuchadnezzar II. He besieged the city of Jerusalem for some 30 months. It began on the 10th day of Tevet and ended with the breach of the walls on the 17th day of Tammuz, and eventually the destruction of Jerusalem and the temple on the 9th of Av. So 30 months Jerusalem was besieged. We're talking about in the Jewish calendar, the year 3336. As far as the secular calendar, we're approximately at BCE 423. Okay, we have one of the early Jewish law commentators. His name was Avud Raham. His real name was Rabbi David Ben Yosef. The book that he authored was called Avud Raham, famous book goes throughout the year, discusses the prayers, and it is a halachic work. He lived 670 years ago. He writes in the 23rd chapter in the Laws of Fasting. He tells us that the 10th fast, it's called the fast of the 10th month because, of course, Tevet, the month that we're in now, we're in the 10th month. So this is when the king Nebuchadnezzar, he besieged Jerusalem, and therefore we fast on this day. Now he goes for a spin here. Listen to what he says. He says the following, that number one, he tells us that when the fast of the 10th of Tevet falls on a Friday, which it does sometimes, then question is, do we fast into Shabbat? Because you're not really supposed to go into Shabbat when you're starving to death. So the answer here is, and that's what we do, is yes. When the 10th of Tevet falls on a Friday, we do fast into Shabbat, which is interesting because there's a Gemara in the Tractate of Eruvin on page 41 that there are many sources that say that if the fast of the 9th of Av, which is the fast of the destruction of the temple, first and second, if it falls on Friday, which it can't, but if it did fall on Friday, then there are many opinions that we would stop the fast before Shabbat and eat something before the Sabbath. So it's interesting how this is a pretty severe fast, this 10th of Tevet. But he goes further. Avud Raham. And he says an amazing point. He says, listen, according to our calendar was set up in the year 4120. That's the Jewish year, which is 5,600 years ago, which is 1,600 years ago, a little bit more than 1,600 years ago, set up by Hillel II, who was a 5th generation Amorah in the land of Israel. And he established the Jewish calendar, once again, in the year 4120. And every single year, we have the same different cycles. So there is a cycle, but the 10th of Tevet fast cannot fall on Shabbat. So Avudraham comes and just hits it out of the ballpark, and he says, if the fast would fall on it would happen on Shabbat, then we would have to fast. Why is that? If the fast for the destruction of the first and second temple, the 9th of Av, falls on Shabbat, which it does, then we push off the fast till Sunday. If the 17th day of Tammuz, where the walls of Jerusalem were breached, if it falls on Shabbat, which it does, then we push it off till Shabbat. So what is the deal here? We're talking about the destruction of the temple. We're talking about destruction of Jerusalem, not a siege on Jerusalem where they were able to manage for 30 months. What's the big deal? It was the beginning of a procedure. And he says, you know why? Because if we look in the prophet of Yechezkel, chapter 24, verses 1 and 2, it says there that on this day, the 10th of Tevet, on this very day, the word that the Torah uses in the prophet Ezekiel, is Be'etzem Hayom Hazeh. Now, in the midst of this day, this expression is found by the fast of Yom Kippur. By the fast of Yom Kippur, it uses the same three words, Be'etzem Hayom Hazeh. So therefore, the Avudraham comes and says there is a connection between Yom Kippur and the 10th of Tevet. Whoa. You know, we know that Yom Kippur is the most serious. We have in Israel, 90% of the population are fasting on the day of Yom Kippur. 90% of the population in Israel are not religious, but they fast on Yom Kippur. So this is a pretty serious day, this Yom Kippur. We're in the synagogue all day. How long are we in the synagogue for the 10th of Tevet? I mean, we're in maybe for an hour and a half time or so. But because it uses the same language, Be'etzem Hayom Hazeh, in the midst of this day, then there's a connection. And just like when Yom Kippur falls on Shabbat, we must fast, so too, if with our calendar that was set up by Hillel, it cannot happen, but if it could happen, when we go back to setting our calendar according to sanctification of the new moon, then we would have to fast on Shabbat on the 10th day of Tevet. Now this is like, whoa, like your eyes should be popping out. That's an amazing thing. What is the big deal about the 10th of Tevet? It was the beginning of a siege which lasted 30 months. Nothing happened during those 30 months. It was difficult times, but Jews know difficult times. It's an amazing thing. Most people don't know this specific Avudraham. But those minority that do know, that are familiar with this Avudraham, it's a famous kind of an opinion in Jewish halakha, Jewish law. However, it's a mistake. Do not think that it is really his opinion. It is actually a much earlier opinion. Where do we see this? We see this in a book that came out in about 600 years ago. We see that Rav Yisachar ibn Shushan, in his book Tikkun Yisachar, brings down this same concept. So this is before the Avudraham. And so we see very clearly that this is an even earlier source. But, however, we're not going to get into it right now. If you search, you will find even earlier sources to not only, of course, Avudaram, which is the Tikkuni Sachar, which is Rabbi Ben Shushan, but we will see it even in the time of the Geonim and the time of the authors of the Balei Tosafot. We will see this opinion brought down. So don't think it's just one voice out in the forest or out in the woods, a lone voice. It's not a lone voice. This bothered many commentators. What in the world is going on here? Why is this fast so severe? When it seems to the naked eye, it seems obvious that the 9th of Av and the 17th of Tammuz are much more serious. They are the destruction of the temple. They are the destruction of the land of Israel. What is going on here? Put on that seatbelt. Chatam Sofer, in his book Torat Moshe, for his lecture that he gave, his class that he gave on the 7th of Adar, he brings down an amazing lesson. He asks this question, and he explains the following, and this is let's get real. Too many times we're thinking about fasts. Oh, they don't affect myself. That was events that happened in the past, but it doesn't affect me today and my future. So let's get real. What's happening in a week from now on the 10th of Tevet is real, and it affects all of us. Listen closely to the words of the Chatam Sofer. Chatam Sofer says the following, that the fast of the 10th of Tevet is different from all other fasts. All other fasts are remembering events that happened in the past. When we're talking about the 17th of Tammuz, when we're talking about 9th of Av, what happened? Destruction of Jerusalem, the temple, the walls of Jerusalem. When we're talking about the fast of Gedaliah, we're talking about what happened when he was assassinated. After the destruction of the first temple by a fellow Jew. Those are events that happened. The exception to the rule is the fast of the 10th of Tevet. And what's the deal? Chatam Sofer says an amazing idea. That every single year, on the 10th of Tevet, God sits with his tribunal court and judges the Jewish people, all of us, as individuals and as a community. God judges us every 10th day of Tevet. What will be the future this year? Not history. This year, baby. What will be the future of the temple? Will it be rebuilt this year, or will continue to be desolate? So therefore the Chatam Sofer says, now I understand the words of this opinion, that if the 10th of Tevet could fall on a Shabbat, we would have to fast, because all other fasts are talking about events that occurred in the past. So therefore we put it off till after Shabbat. But in the 10th of Tevet, we're talking about right now, real, making it real. In 7 days, God decides what our lot is going to be as far as the Temple Mount, as far as the Beit HaMikdash is going to be concerned. So that is a wake-up call for all of us. Where do we stand? It's time to look in the mirror. First myself, and afterwards others. Where do we stand when it comes to the Temple Mount, when it comes to the Beit HaMikdash? Are we real? Or is this fake news? Not really interested. Today, How do we get real with this? As far as our own selves, do we ever say Tikkun Chatzot, a special prayer that a minority of Jews get up in the middle of the night and sit on the floor and weep about the destruction of Jerusalem, the destruction of the Torah, the destruction of the Jewish people? But we have a Torah, we have the Jewish people, yeah. But what we should be looking, the way that the Jewish people should be appearing today, and the way that the Torah should be seen today, is a very, very pale image of the true Torah and the true Jewish people. I mean, some people might be mistaken, if you're stoned enough, like the face of the Jewish people is what we see in politics, in the Knesset, like, give me a break. So, do we ever say this prayer? And forget about getting up at night. Well, it's hard for me to get up at night. I would say, to heck with the night. Do we say it during the day? If we started during the day, maybe we'll get some time to the night. And maybe sometimes we can end this whole exile. So, as far as our prayers, as far as our thoughts, when we say the Birkat HaMazon, the grace after meals, and we stop and there's so many references about Jerusalem, do we really stop for a second and contemplate what we're talking about, how we yearn, and it really bothers us that we're in the hands of losers, we're in the hands of scoffers? Or the beat goes on. There are many organizations, the Temple Institute, that are proceeding and they are building vessels and altars, whatever needs to be made, in order that as soon as the Beit HaMikdash, the temple, arrives, is built, we are ready to go. Do we support these organizations? I can't pray. I can't learn about the laws of the temple, whatever it might be. But can we support organizations that are doing something about it? And that gives me a connection, a share in their progression. So let's get real. That's lesson number 1 about getting real. Second lesson. The Rabbi Yigal Bar-On, in his book, page 178, Milul No'omo, he asks the same question here. Why is this fast, the 10th of Tevet, why is it so severe compared to all the other fasts? On Friday, if it falls on Friday, which it does, we have to go into Shabbat until we're out of synagogue, and then only then we could break our fast. We're fasting on an hour of Shabbat. If it would fall on Shabbat, we would have to fast. What's going on here? And he says an amazing lesson, a real life lesson. No more of this, oh yeah, the 10th of Tevet, yeah, bring it down. Yeah, it's up there somewhere, way far away from us. Let's bring it down to real life. He asks a great question. Question is, why in the world does God care about the Gentile city of Nineveh? There are thousands of Gentile cities in the world. And of all the cities in the world, God saw fit to send the prophet Jonah to the city of Nineveh, somewhere near Iran, Iraq. What in the world is going on here? What is happening over here? Why didn't God send prophets all over the world? That's the question. And Rabbi Bar-On, an amazing answer. In Judaism, in Torah, in life, real life, the most important time of life is beginnings. The beginning, how do I start? You know, there's an expression in English, hey, did you get up on the right side of the bed? Interesting expression. What happens during the middle of the day, in the evening? Did you get up on the right side of the bed? Because if you get up on the right side of the bed, you have a good chance you're going to have a good day. Where do we see this? Listen to this amazing idea. King Solomon says in the book Kohelet, chapter 7, verse 8, a good ending is better than a good beginning. Again, a good ending is better than a good beginning. What does this mean exactly? Our sages explain what this means. A good ending is when there is a good beginning. That's what King Solomon, the wisest of men, was talking about. When there's a good beginning, start, then there's a good ending. Which means in life, we have to really put an emphasis on beginnings. Where does he come up with this idea? Amazing idea. Listen closely. Yonah is sent, of all places, to Nineveh. There are hundreds, thousands of other Gentile countries who are not so spiritually uplifted, yuck, 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 are in terrible spiritual mud, and they don't get any prophet sent their way. Why is that? Listen to who Nineveh really is. It says in the beginning, in Genesis chapter 10, verses 9 through 11. It says the following, that there was a tremendous warrior. His name was Nimrod. And Nimrod began to convince people. He was like one of these missionaries, the early missionaries. He would go around the world convincing people that there is no God. He was the one that threw Abraham into the fire for believing in God. So Nimrod, okay, if you look at the word, the name Nimrod, it comes from the word merid, which is rebellion. His name is rebellion. Don't ask me why there's a few people in Israel, that Jews, that they have the name Nimrod. That's for a different class. Why that is? Because it's a rebellion against God. So, the next verse, after it tells us about this great warrior Nimrod, it says that Ashur left, a person, a name, left Nimrod, and he started his own city. And that city was Nineveh. Amazing. City was Nineveh. Why did he leave? Why did he depart? Everybody, if you're hip, if you're on the in, if you're PC, you were with Nimrod. What is this jive? Leaving the masses. Leaving what's in. So our sages tell us an amazing line. That when Ashur saw that Nimrod and his cohorts and his disciples were bringing children, were leading children off the derech, off the right path in life. They were taking children and giving them a terrible education, an atheistic education, that there is no God. When Ashur saw this, he said, I'm not having my kids grow up in such a town, in such a city. I'm getting out of here. And with all those difficulties, when you have to leave and you start a new place and you You leave a city, all the comforts, everything has been set up. There's roads, there's sewers, there's infrastructure. Doesn't matter to him. He sees what's happening online in real time. And he doesn't want his family to fall to the evil teachings of Nimrod. So he takes off. So folks, an amazing thing. He sets up a country, Ashur, called Nineveh. Interesting how this is the only country that God sends a prophet. Why? Because God never forgot this beautiful self-sacrifice of Ashur. When he saw at the beginning, he saw the buds, the beginning, the budding of the rebellion against God. It was just at its beginning. When he saw and he noticed it, he said, I'm not waiting any longer, because the beginnings are going to make a good end, as we explained according to our sages. A good beginning creates a good ending. So he says, I'm out of here. I don't like the way that this is playing out here. I'm getting off the boat at the beginning. Before the boat sets out to sea, I'm getting off here in the shore. So God never forgot that kindness. And look, because of the fact that they had this trait, Ashur, Nineveh, it was in their blood, beginnings. So therefore, look at the repentance that they did. There's a law that if, let's say somebody steals metal and uses it and then builds a house, and then someone comes up a year later and says, listen, I just found my cameras, I see that you stole my metal bars, it's worth $10,000, give it to me back. Oh, give it back. It's in this building up here. It's a 10-story building. We used your metal, thank you. So the law, the Jewish law is you do not have to dismantle the building and give back all the metal poles. You could give a monetary exchange. Listen to what they did in Nineveh. These Gentiles, they took apart when somebody came up to them now, when Yonah tells them that in 40 days, if they don't get their act together, they're going to be destroyed. The people of Nineveh took this very seriously. And if there was any case where somebody said, listen, you stole from me materials, they would even dismantle a closet, a warehouse, or a home in order to give it back, the same one that they took. Their animals, they refuse to give food to their animals. Where is this coming from? It's coming from a beginning when you're able to catch a disease in the bud, as they call it. You have a good chance of overcoming it. If you wait a day, 2 days, 3 days, you're in hot water. This is the lesson. And therefore, Rabbi Baron says, the severeness of Asara b'Tevet, the 10th of Tevet, is that it was the beginning. That God gave the Jewish people 30 months to wake up and repent. And if they would have just caught the moment, these moments, these days, these months, if they would have caught the time and stopped and called the time out and looked in the mirror and got real, then we would have never reached the destruction of the temple. So therefore, it is more severe than the actual destruction of the temple. The actual destruction of the temple, it's too late. The fat lady already sang. Game's over. Game's over. So the important lesson here that the Torah, Judaism, life teaches us. Beginning. You look at a young adult. You look at a young adult. You know when that young adult was made? He was made in those young years. When he was, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You have a tree, a young sapling, and it's bent out of shape. When it's young, you could still bend it back into shape. If you wait too long, you lose. There's no fixing of that tree, of that young sapling. There's nothing to do anymore. So everything in life, in Judaism and Torah, that's why there's such a big stress on beginnings. Look in Judaism. The first year of marriage, amazing. There's an entire year of marriage for the honeymoon couple. People think on honeymoon for a couple of days, a week, 2 weeks. In Judaism, it's one year. And there are laws, many laws that pertain. Are you allowed to leave your house? Are you allowed to leave the city, your community? It's very, the first year of marriage is going to decide what's going to be for the rest of the years. You look at the Rosh Chodesh, the first day of the month. Why is it special? We dress up. We have a special meal. We have special prayers. We have additional prayers. Why? Because it's the first day of the month and you have to catch the beginning, because if we wait, we lose. You look at the morning prayers compared to the afternoon and evening. How can you compare? There is no comparison. The morning prayers are approximately 50 minutes to 60 minutes. The afternoon is 15 minutes. The evening is also about 15 minutes. Why is that? Because the beginning of the day, getting up on the right side of the bed, that's what it's all about. And therefore, all the weight, God puts all the weight on that first morning prayer. And that's why it is no comparison in time and intensity and the laws, what you can do and what you can't do. Look up in a Jewish law book, the laws of the morning prayers. There are hundreds, if not 1,000 something pages. Look at the afternoon service, there are 4 or 5 pages. Look at the evening service, 2 or 3 pages. That's the same idea here. The first fruits. Why do I have to take my first fruits of the 7 species up to Jerusalem? Who gives? No, we care. The first fruits. How are you going to, we eat 2, 3 times a day, some people more, God forbid. But eating is a part of our life. It's a big part of our life. So if you notice, Judaism, it takes the first always and makes an issue out of it. Before you can indulge in that food, you have to first say a bracha. According to how you're saying the blessing is going to be, why are you eating actually? What are your thoughts? Are you eating just because it tastes good? Are you eating so you could have strength to do good deeds? You're eating so you will be a calm, cool, collective person. Because when a person doesn't eat, a lot of times it makes him excitable and on edge and not very friendly, user-friendly. So what are our intentions when we eat? So we have the first fruits. We have, before you're allowed to eat a fruit or a vegetable, first we have to give a certain amount to the priest and to the Levites and to the poor people. Why? Because everything is dependent on how we start the ball rolling, the beginning. Notice, what is the first word in the Torah? Probably the most important one, Bereshit, the beginning. That is what it's all about. Judaism, life, reality, getting real, is catching ourselves at the beginning. If we see ourselves getting bent out of shape, whatever the issue is, if we see that we notice that we're angry the last week or so, we got to call a time out and see how we're going to rid ourselves and cleanse ourselves of these negative traits. You have to call a time out, because if we just keep on going in energy and just keep on rolling, then we're really going to be in bad shape. So the second lesson of the severity of the fast of the 10th of Tevet is that because it was the beginning of the end, the Jewish people, if we would have called a time out, if we would have regrouped and rethought our lives, where we're heading to, Do you know where you're going to? Do you like the things that life are showing you? Yeah, I think that was Diana Ross. So it's important. Yeah, do you know where you're going to? So when we see that we're a little bit off, because life is dynamic, and we could see, wow, I noticed that I'm on the phone, instead of my usual hour a day, I'm on the phone for 2 hours. Call a timeout, stop and think, how could I regroup? How could I readjust? I don't want to go that direction. 1 hour, now 2 hours, 2 hours brings 3 hours, and who knows how that ends up. So it's important to stop and say, I'm starting now from the beginning, a new beginning, because they are the most important. And that's the severity of the 10th day of Tevet. Okay. Next point. An amazing words of our sages. It's brought down in Tanchuma, the book Tanchuma, portion Tazria, on paragraph 13. Listen to this. It says the following. Our sages tell us that the 10th day of Tevet was really supposed to be the destruction of the temple. Amazing. The real day of the destruction of the temple was supposed to be 10th of Tevet. Very interesting. So why isn't it? It's just the beginning. It's the beginning of the siege. Jerusalem was besieged. So listen to this compassion. Even though when God has furious judgment against the Jewish people, against the Jewish temple, against Jewish land, it's all about to be, destroyed at some level. There's still mercy. God says, really the temple should now be destroyed on the 10th day of Tevet. However, imagine going into exile in the month of Tevet, right? We're talking about now, we're in the month of end of December, beginning of January. Well, it's real fun to go out right now into exile. Let me tell you, I had about 20 years ago, I had a fire in my house. And thank God, sometimes I get up a little bit early before the sunrise morning prayers. And I got up early that morning. And before I sat down to learn, I smelled kind of like a fire. And then I went and I saw our heater, our gigantic heater was on fire. But like the towering inferno. So I woke up my wife, we quickly got the kids out before that area where my kids' rooms were would be totally impossible because of the smoke to enter or to exit. So thank God we were able to get out. And eventually neighbors, this is something like 4:30 in the morning. Eventually our neighbors, this happened right now at this time of the year. A couple days, days before or after, but about this time of year. And thank God, they brought different fire hoses in. And then we were forced, now we have the cleanup, because we weren't able to live in that house for another 2 weeks. So we had neighbors that took us in and to live at their house, of course. And now we had to do the cleanup. So a lot of stuff was fine. Problem was that it was wet. Now, if something's wet, you got to dry it out. Because if you don't dry it out, it's going to get mold and mildew, and it's going to get ruined. So now this is not the greatest time in Israel for nice sunny days. I mean, if you could look outside, it's a beautiful sunny day in Israel. It's always beautiful. Whatever the weather is, it's always beautiful in Israel. Some days are more beautiful. This is it. So you know that we need sun. We needed like 4 or 5 days to be able to dry out hundreds of items. If it was mattresses, if it was blankets, if it was clothes, that they were just, with the hoses, they were just watered down. We had like this miracle at this time of year, 5 straight days, no rain and sunshine. Doesn't always happen. And so I know firsthand what it means at this time of the year to be, to be dependent on the weather and to be outside. We don't have a home right now, and we had to, thank God, a lot of people offered to bring us in. So our sages tell us in Tanchuma, Tazria, it tells an amazing thing, that God said, even though the Jewish people deserve exactly what they're getting, and the city deserves to be destroyed, I am not going to exile them in this month, December, end of December, beginning of January, because of the climate. And it's just going to make it, women, children, people that are ill, it's going to make it 1,000,000 times worse. When the weather is good, no matter, I remember when they threw us out of Gush Katif in the Gaza Strip, or in Yamit and other places, it's a big difference. I've been in both situations. I've been when they've thrown us out and it's beautiful outside, and I've been when they throw us out and it's freezing outside and raining and cold. Believe me, totally two different experiences, totally left, right, earth, and outer space. That's how different it is. So God said, I will have them exiled instead of this month. I will wait till the summer months where it's pleasant to be outside, and even at night, it's pleasant at night. What's the idea here? This is another real life lesson. Let's get real. There are people, not many, but there are people that are able to stand up once in their life and do something great. Does that make that person a great person? For sure not. Maimonides is asked the question, what is better, to give one person a lot of money, charity, or to give 100 people a small amount? And of course, the Jewish answer is very simple. 100 times to give 100 different people. Make that muscle. Everything is a muscle. There's a charity muscle. Get your hand, put it in your pocket, take it out, and give it. And giving. You want to strengthen that muscle? You got to do it a lot of times. Because if you don't use it, you lose it. So, what makes a great person? Not a person who one day wakes up and does something great. Person will be rewarded, for sure. But that's not a great person. A great person is the man or the woman that is able to do during their lifetime thousands of little things that perhaps no one even notices. No one ever even noticed it. That's a great person that is able to partake in the little details that no one else thought about, but they're so important. So that is the third. That is the third real life lesson on this 10th of Tevet, that we have to start working out and perfecting ourselves on the little things. Don't look for those once in every 50 years, a big moment. I happened to be walking down the street and some guy was clobbered and I saved him. Yay! You should save him. And it's a great thing, for sure. But that is not necessarily a great person. That is one great act. Greatness is hundreds and thousands and millions of small acts. When you saw the great leaders of Israel, Gdolim, if you would sit back and watch them, their greatness was not the once in a while big things that they did. It was the hundreds of small things that they did, and they noticed and cared about and took care of during a regular Monday morning. So that's the lesson. God, He was punishing the Jewish people. The temple would be destroyed. Jerusalem, the land of Israel. But still, God looked at the small details. You know what? They deserve right now to be thrown out and exiled. But it's freezing outside. It's cold outside. It's not too pleasant. Or even if it's pleasant, it's raining. That's not too pleasant to be outside. Small details. God cares enough about those small details, even though we don't deserve it. He's still providing for us the small details, which are, in the end, big. You look at a marriage. What's a marriage? The big deals? Not at all. It's the small details. What makes a good marriage. Last but not least, put on another seatbelt here. An amazing take by, once again, the one and only, the Chatam Sofer. Chatam Sofer wrote about 200 years ago, year 5593, in his Torah words for the 8th of Tevet. He asked once again the question we've been concentrating on today: why in the world, if the 10th of Tevet fast fell on a Sabbath, we would have to fast? It seems like it's a very light fast, not so serious. We've seen why it is so severe, why it is so important. But now we're going to give one more idea here and bring it down to real life. Us, looking in the mirror, how are we doing on these issues? God gives us this day to look in the mirror and to change ourselves. That's what it's all about. If it's up in the sky somewhere, up in the clouds, so, that's not the purpose of the day. We missed the point. Listen to this. Chatam Sofer says to us, you know what? You know why we would fast on Shabbat, on the Sabbath, if the 10th of Tevet fast fell on Sabbath? Let me tell you why. Open up the book of Ezekiel, chapter 24, verses 1 and 2. And it says there various unusual nuances. Number one, it says, God says to the prophet Ezekiel, I want you to write the date, the day. Sunday, Monday, Tuesday. It's very unusual. How many of you out there know what day the Jews left Egypt? Who knows what day the Jewish people went in the land of Israel with Joshua and the walls came tumbling down, down, down? How many people know what day of the week that was? What in the world does it matter what day God tells the prophet Ezekiel to write this down, the day of the prophecy and the month that I understand that the siege of Jerusalem begins? And tell it to the Jewish people that on the 10th day of Tevet, what day of the week? What day of the week was it? Folks, hold on to your wigs. It was on the Sabbath. The siege of Nebuchadnezzar in the year 423 BCE, 3336 Jewish talk. It began on the Sabbath. Who cares what day it was? I mean, if it was on Sunday, I know, because, we have our football games, football on Sunday. I know if it was on Monday, it'd be a problem because there's Monday night football. But who cares if it was what day of the week? The Chatam Sofer says we care. The Jewish people care what day of the week it is. Why? Because of the fact that the destruction happened on Sabbath. And you know why it happened on the Shabbat? The Chatam Sofer goes one more TKO. He just like, pow! Let me have it. The Torah uses an unusual word. It says on the 10th day of Tevet, on this specific day. Now we know it was Shabbat, according to the Chatam Sofer. On this specific day, the 10th of Tevet, on Shabbat, Nebuchadnezzar besieged Jerusalem. Very nice. But what's the word of the siege word? What in Hebrew? It says samach. Samach is leaned. Now if we know what a siege is, and the Torah always uses the word tsar, tzadi resh. That means to besiege a community, a city. Tsar. Why did it change the word? Why did God use a different word towards the prophet Ezekiel and the Jewish people? Listen to the Chatam Sofer. The Chatam Sofer says, you know why? Samach also, not just to lean, like the Babylonians leaned against the city, which could be understood as a siege. Okay, but no, they relied. Smach also means, samech mem, chaf sofit, means to rely. Nebuchadnezzar understood spirituality, the Talmud tells us. He understood spirituality. And you know what? When he looked, at first he did not want, the Talmud tells us that for many years, 18 years, he did not want to attack Jerusalem or destroy the temple. He stayed away from that. Only after 18 years. What changed? And you know, the Chatam Sofer tells us he relied that the city of Jerusalem would be destroyed. Why? Because the Jews destroyed the Holy Sabbath. The Jews destroyed the holiness of the seventh day of Shabbat. And therefore he knew that Jerusalem would no longer allow such a desecration to continue to take place within its midst. There was a certain border, there was a certain limit to the desecration of Sabbath that Jerusalem could witness. And after that, it's a spiritual land, it's a holy land. It vomited out the Jewish people. So that's why the prophet Ezekiel uses the word relied. Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylonia, relied on the fact that Jerusalem had been desecrated past the limits on the Sabbath. The Sabbath had been desecrated. And therefore, he would eventually be victorious because of the desecration of Sabbath. And as we are told, the first temple was destroyed because that the Jewish people desecrated the Sabbath. The prophet Jeremiah speaks about this many times, about the desecration of the Sabbath. Folks, this is an amazing idea. Do we understand what time we're living? For the first time in history, in Ramat Gan, which is in the Tel Aviv area, in the last few weeks, there is certain public bus transportation that is running on a major artery on the Jabotinsky Road in that area, in the center of Israel, Ramat Gan, with the approval of the city council of Ramat Gan. Other communities, other cities are also contemplating to have public transportation, something that has not been here, except for one city in Haifa. But all other places for 71 years, it has not been. This is a tremendous red-black flag. And once again, let's get real. The siege was successful because the Jewish people had desecrated the Sabbath. The temple was destroyed because the Jewish people desecrated the Sabbath. The land of Israel was destroyed because the Jewish people desecrated Sabbath. So let's look in the mirror And right now, what are we doing? Firstly, what are we doing to improve our personal, individual, or our family Sabbath? The Chafetz Chaim, Rabbi Yisrael Meir Kagan, writes in the third book of a Code of Jewish Law, and amazing in the beginning, he writes there that a person that is not learning the laws of Sabbath, it's not a question if they are desecrating Sabbath. They are, of course, desecrating Sabbath. If you're not learning the laws, you are not perhaps desecrating, you are definitely desecrating Sabbath. How does our Sabbath look? Does it look like any other regular day? What is the conversation that takes place on the Sabbath? When do we bring in the Sabbath? When do we go out? You go sometimes to synagogues and you have people 20 minutes before the end of Sabbath. Yeah, they're ready there. They got to get that first cigarette, They got to, instead of ending Shabbat and then praying, no, they start praying 20 minutes before the end of the Shabbat. So when they finish the prayers, that's the end of Shabbat, so they don't have to waste any time. Folks, where do we do our shopping? When we want to go take our kids to various amusement sites, do we check if the place keep the Sabbath or not? That is something that we could do. I know that I have a camp, 40 some kids every summer. We try, thank God. God is good to us, He helps us. We make sure that not to take the kids to various amusement parks that desecrate Sabbath in the Holy Land. And there are organizations that are trying to educate, that are trying to invite non-religious people to experience what a Shabbat is, to go to a synagogue. There are so many people out there that we can support if we're not able to improve our own Sabbath observance. If we are not able to go out and demonstrate, there was the past Sabbath in Bnei Brak on Jabotinsky Street, there were 14 people arrested. And a lot of times, that's a separate class, it's a separate subject, blocking roads, and especially on the Sabbath, it's even more problematic blocking a road on Sabbath. But let me tell you something. With all that said, with the difficulty of blocking the road, and there's innocent people out there, etc. I get it. I understand. I know that as far as MLB, Martin Luther King, there's difference of opinion. I don't know why it's not clear, but I looked it up. But it's not clear. There are some opinion that he did, even though he was a man of peace, he did do blocking of the roads, which of course there are innocent people there that get stuck in the blocking of the road. Some people say that, he never did that. It wasn't so long ago. I don't know why it's not a part of history, but I personally, if you know anything about that, write it in the comment section. Love to hear it. But there is a school out there that says that even MLB, Martin Luther King, MLK, excuse me. MLB is Major League Baseball, man. I got that one wrong, yeah. It's not even baseball season to fall on that one. MLK, right. So, he's pretty loved. I mean, I know now he's a controversial person because he has something with his personal life. Not going to get into that one either. That's kind of messy. But, he was one time a big, big hero. And how can you block innocent people? How can you block streets? So, let me just say one thing. I'm not going to open my mouth against people that are out there on the Sabbath and it hurts them and they're willing to go up against the police and perhaps get beat up or run over by a horse on the Sabbath and being thrown into a police van and taken away on the Sabbath. I'm not saying once again that this is the right approach. It's not the point. The point is that these people give a damn. Do we care? Does it bother us? What's going on in the land of Israel or in our neighborhoods, in our communities? Are we doing anything about it? Are we improving our own Sabbath? Are we helping others that deal with this issue? Are we supporting them with our time, our efforts, our money? Just like this. I'm going to leave this hopefully Ephraim could show it clearer. There is today at 8 o'clock in a place called the Arena. I know that. It's a funny name. Arena. Arena, what's the name of the arena? This in Jerusalem is just called the Arena. And today it says that God has sent us a Tzav Shmona. Tzav Shmona is a military term that when there is a danger to the land of Israel, they send telegrams or emails to all the soldiers, and there's a call up for all the military and the reserves. So this is pretty serious. It's talking about tonight there's some kind of event with a lot of the leading rabbis of our generation to protest peacefully against the desecration of Shabbat. It's at 8 o'clock, 8 o'clock tonight. Once again, this is an example. There are many, many other places that are also beginning to organize and to, in everyone's own way, that they feel that they're able to contribute. Everyone can improve personally, community-wise, nationally-wise. We could save ourselves. We could save Jerusalem. We could save the land of Israel. Because let's not be mistaken, it didn't turn out too well when we desecrated the Sabbath during the time of the first temple. That led to the destruction of the land of Israel, of the temple, of Jerusalem. So we have our work cut out for us in the next 7 days. Me, you, all of us, get the message out. These are some of the points that we should be concentrating and getting real